I wasn't looking for a lost medium when I started researching early photography. I was mapping the history of public entertainment, trying to understand what people actually experienced before film existed, before television, before any kind of screen. And then I found a reference to a building in London, a rotunda on Leicester Square, opened in 1793. The description stopped me cold. A circular room containing a 360-degree painting, visitors entering through a deliberately darkened corridor, climbing stairs in near total dark, then emerging into a scene so convincing that some people physically stumbled. A painted world surrounding them on all sides, lit by hidden skylights so the light seemed to come from inside the image itself, with real dirt and rocks and vegetation placed in the foreground to blend seamlessly with the canvas, until you couldn't tell where reality ended and the painting began. I'd heard of panoramas. I thought they were paintings you looked at from across a room. I didn't know they were theaters. I didn't know they were specifically engineered to disorient. And I didn't know that between 1793 and the arrival of cinema, roughly 100 million people had stood inside one. That number stopped me, 100 million people. And yet almost nobody today could tell you what a cyclorama was. Something this widespread, this culturally significant, doesn't just fade, it gets erased. And when I started pulling on how these panoramas disappeared, the story that emerged was stranger than I expected. The story that emerged was stranger than I expected. Let me tell you what these things actually were, because the official history of visual entertainment has done an almost perfect job of making them sound quaint. Robert Barker, a Scottish painter, received his patent for the panorama format in 1787. The concept sounds simple, a painting that goes all the way around you. But what Barker built in practice was something far more sophisticated than that description suggests. The building itself was the experience. Purpose-built rotundas with no external windows, visitors entering through corridors designed specifically to make your eyes forget daylight existed. You climbed stairs in near darkness. Then you emerged onto a viewing platform and the painting surrounded you in every direction, floor to ceiling as far as you could see. The skylights were hidden behind the top of the canvas, so light appeared to come from inside the image itself. The bottom of the painting was concealed behind a foreground of real dirt, real objects, real physical material. The boundary between the painted scene and the physical space you occupied simply didn't exist visually. Witnesses described the sensation as transportation. Some felt vertigo. Some refused to believe the scene around them wasn't real, even knowing it was painted. The Boston Advertiser, reviewing the Gettysburg cyclorama in 1883, wrote that it was impossible to tell where reality ends and the painting begins. And here's what they were showing inside these places. And here's what they were showing inside these places. Not pastoral landscapes, not still lifes. The battles of Trafalgar and the Nile, Jerusalem, Cairo, Athens, Rio de Janeiro, the Grand Canyon. Military campaigns that whole generations had survived were being reconstructed in 3 dimensions, with music, with narrators, with audiences standing literally inside the scene. Veterans of the exact battles depicted walked through and reportedly couldn't distinguish the painted fallen from the real ones. The scale of production was staggering. Paul Philippotto, commissioned by Chicago investors to paint Gettysburg, spent months interviewing survivors and commissioning photographs of the battlefield before a team of artists labored for years in Brussels, producing a finished canvas that weighed 6 tons and cost $200,000 in 1883 money, 400 feet long, 50 feet high. And that was one painting from one artist for one city. By one estimate, around 300 major productions existed. Curators who cataloged panoramas shown in London alone between 1793 and 1863 found records of 126 separate exhibitions. London was one market among many. Paris, Berlin, Vienna, New York, Chicago, Moscow, Tokyo, all had panorama halls, all had audiences filing through darkened corridors into constructed worlds. 100 million people between 1870 and the arrival of cinema. Then cinema arrived, and something happened that I find genuinely difficult to explain. Not just the industry declined, not just the business model became obsolete. The physical buildings were demolished, the paintings were destroyed, the medium was written out of the story of immersive entertainment as if it had never preceded film at all. Ask yourself why. When industries fail, we don't typically demolish the buildings and burn the inventory. Libraries from the 1800s still exist. Theaters from the same period still stand. Music halls and opera houses and galleries survived into the present, but cyclorama rotundas, these purpose-built round structures with no other use, were leveled with unusual efficiency. The Gettysburg Panorama's Chicago building was torn down. The Leicester Square rotunda, the first permanent panorama building in the world, was absorbed into a church after closing in 1863. By 1910, every panorama can in Japan had been demolished and replaced by cinema palaces. Not sold, not gradually abandoned, replaced specifically by the competing medium. And the paintings themselves. Of the estimated 300 major productions that existed, roughly 15 survive intact. 15. That is a survival rate so low it implies something more deliberate than neglect. Paper isn't that fragile. Canvas isn't that fragile. But these paintings were enormous, some stretching nearly 400 feet of canvas, and enormous things are difficult to preserve without institutional will. That will was simply absent. The official explanation is economics. Cinema was cheaper, more flexible, easier to update and transport. The market moved on. Natural selection of entertainment formats, nothing more. But the economics don't explain why the surviving panoramas were modified. This is the part that bothers me most. The Gettysburg cyclorama is the clearest example. When a Georgian named Paul Atkinson acquired it in the late 1800s, he had a group of defeated Confederate soldiers repainted as Union soldiers. He literally altered the historical record held inside the canvas. A mannequin of Clark Gable was added in the 20th century. Each new owner reshaped the scene to match their preferred narrative, their preferred version of what the battle meant and who had won it. And that's the Gettysburg Panorama, the one that survived. What was inside the ones that didn't? What historical scenes, what depictions of battles and cities and moments were shown to 100 million people and then quietly destroyed when their owners decided the version of history on the canvas had become inconvenient? The Borodino Panorama in Russia was set on fire in 1967. More than 60% of it burned. The destroyed sections were later repainted, described by those responsible as simultaneously restored and ideologically corrected. 60% of a canvas depicting one of the most decisive clashes in European history, gone, replaced with something more politically suitable. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. The disappearance of panoramas from cultural memory follows the same rhythm as other erasures in this period. A medium of enormous popular reach, one that shaped how 100 million people understood history and geography and the scale of human events, vanished within a generation. The buildings were demolished, the artifacts were destroyed or modified, and cinema was celebrated as the originator of immersive entertainment. Its predecessor quietly pressed into footnotes. I keep returning to what the experience actually was. Standing in the center of a 360-degree painted scene, surrounded by real objects blending into the image, with music and narration, inside a building engineered to make you forget the outside world existed. The architects built disorientation in deliberately. They wanted you incapable of distinguishing the actual from the simulated. They achieved it so completely that visitors described physical symptoms, vertigo, nausea, the bodily response of a nervous system that couldn't locate the line between what was real and what was canvas. We call that virtual reality now. We treat it as something emerging from digital technology, developed across the last few decades. We have no popular understanding that audiences in 1883 stood inside an experience functionally comparable to what we're still refining today. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. What else disappeared with these panoramas? What subjects were shown to those 100 million people that now exist only in secondhand descriptions? What cities were rendered in careful detail before development erased them from the physical world? What military campaigns were reconstructed with actual survivor testimony before the witnesses died? The booklets sold at exhibitions were cheaply printed and rarely preserved. Photographs of the original canvases are scattered. The rotundas are gone. The paintings are ash or repainted fragments, or sealed in museum storage where no one visits. We don't know what was inside most of them, and we've been taught not to find this remarkable. The official history of visual entertainment moves cleanly from painting to photography to film, each step building logically on the last. The panorama doesn't fit that narrative. It's too sophisticated, too clearly a precursor to what was later claimed as invention. Acknowledging it fully would complicate the story. Complicated stories get simplified. The rotundas were demolished, the canvases burned, the audience that experienced them died, and their accounts died with them. And the medium was quietly reclassified as a curiosity that preceded real visual culture, rather than as a technology that achieved something film is still working toward. 15 panoramas survive. Go find one, stand in the center of it, and let the building disorient you the way it was designed to. Notice how the light appears to come from inside the image. Notice how your eyes cannot locate the edge where real objects end and painted surface begins. Then ask yourself what was in the ones that burned. What versions of history, what records of places and events and moments, what understanding of the world did those 100 million people carry with them when they walked back out into the light? And ask yourself why we've agreed, without anyone apparently deciding it, that none of this was worth saving.